The 8 hounds of the Rookhaven pack, feared across every parish in the high moor country of Derbyshire, had lowered themselves, head to the gravel, in a rough ring around the new housemaid. She had not said one word to make them do it. Along the kennel fence, grown men who handled these animals every day of their lives stood without moving. Ned Fairclough, the underkeeper, held a lead with no hound on the end of it and did not seem to know he was holding it. The wicket boy had both fists pressed hard against his mouth. Not one of the men reached for the gate. Not one of them could look away. Josiah Thorne, huntsman of the Rookhaven pack, came shoving through them with the voice that ruled the whole yard. "Up," he said. No hound rose. 8 dark bodies lay head down on the raked gravel around the small woman, some flank to flank. Some with a hand of space between them and every one of them still. At the front of the ring, the old lid bitch kept her scarred gray head lowered nearly to the maid's shoe. Under the stone arch that joined the yard to the great house, a tall man in a black coat had stopped in the middle of his stride. Adrian, Duke of Rookhaven, the man half the county, called the Beast of Rookhaven, though never once, within his hearing, looked at the ring and looked at the woman standing motionless at the center of it. And he asked the only question there was to ask. Who is she? 20 minutes before that, a hiring cart had swayed up the back lane, tipped a battered trunk into the mud by the kennel wall, and rolled away again before its passenger had got both feet down onto the ground. Behind the wall, the hounds were already at their morning noise, deep carrying voices, the kind of sound that made cottage women cross to the far side of the road. The young woman in the gray traveling dress did not flinch at any of it. She bent and picked her own trunk up out of the mud, and she was wiping her hands on her apron when the housekeeper came hurrying out from the servants' door. "Miss Rushton," the housekeeper said. "I am Mrs. Pruitt." "Oh, and they have gone and dropped you in the wet. I am sorry for that." Mrs. Pruitt took one handle of the trunk without being asked to, which told the new maid a great deal about her all at once. "We will have to go round by the kennel yard, I am afraid," she said. "Mr. Thorne has his exercise ropes strung across the servants' passage, and he does not take them down for anybody living." So they went round. The kennel yard lay wide and raked, a black iron gate shut at the far end, the handlers at their stations, and the pack moving loose at their morning exercise behind an inner wicket. It should have been a minute of walking along the fence and no more. Then Ned Fairclough's hand slipped on the inner wicket. A young hound put its shoulder into the gap. The whole pack came pouring through into the open yard at once. The handlers did not hesitate because their own escapes had been built long ago. They went up the climbing rails and onto the mounting block. Every refuge in that yard had been arranged for the men who worked it and for no one else. Hester Rushton marked that even while her own heart slammed against her ribs. She was in the middle of the gravel with her trunk at her feet, and every path to the fence ran directly past 8 enormous hounds. So she stopped. She did not call out. She did not raise a hand, or crouch, or go hunting a dog's eyes with her own. She did not take one single step. Fear went through her like cold water poured down the spine, and she let it come and let it pass, standing there with her hands open and empty at her sides, because her father had been a kennel man, and she knew exactly what running was worth in a yard full of hounds. The old lead bitch came to her first, and in no hurry at all. She was huge and gray about the muzzle, with a pale mark of scarred skin laid across one shoulder in the shape of an arrowhead where no hair had grown back. She put her nose to the open palm where it hung at the maid's side. Hester never lifted the hand, never offered it up. Then the old hound raised her head and looked a long moment into the woman's face, and whatever she found there, she answered it. She lay down. The silence that came after was the loudest thing the yard had ever produced. Somewhere along the fence, a man began to say a prayer under his breath. The slow breathing of the hounds carried all the way to the arch where the Duke stood. Mrs. Pruitt found her voice from the fence line. "Hester Rushton, your grace," she said. The new maid. Adrian had last seen a soot-black girl of 12 through a wall of smoke, 8 years gone, and he did not place her now. Josiah had known a kennel child once, not the grown housemaid. A white cap had made invisible to him, and he did not place her either. Neither man matched the woman to the child until Mrs. Pruitt said the surname aloud. And when she said it, the color went out of Josiah Thorne's face. It happened in front of 40 witnesses. It looked like exactly what it was, which was fear wearing a master's coat. He recovered fast, and he recovered loud. "Your Grace," he said, "a pack that will not answer its own master is an unsound pack. Unsound hounds are dangerous, and dangerous hounds are put down. That is kennel judgment, and it is mercy, whatever else it looks like from where you are standing." Hester spoke for the first time in that yard. "For lying down," she said. Mrs. Pruitt started toward her then, and Hester asked her low and even not to run. "No one in this yard should run," she said. Around her feet, 8 feared animals breathed slow and easy, and the only person shaking in the whole yard was the huntsman. Adrian came out from under the arch. "No hound dies," he said, "before I know why 8 of them chose to be still." His eyes went from the ring to the maid inside it and stayed there. "Kennel them," he said. Then, "Bring her to me." The old lead hound rose when she chose to rise, and not a moment before. The ring broke apart, and the yard breathed again as one body. Hester bent and picked up her trunk. She had come home, and the dogs had known it before any person in the place. That was the whole of what she understood in that moment, and it was enough to be going on with. They brought her up to the small breakfast room where the Duke of Rookhaven stood at the window with his back to the door, and where Josiah Thorne had already taken a chair. Hester read the arrangement in one glance, the way she had learned to read every room she had ever been set to clean. There were 2 chairs at the table. The Duke stood at the window by his own choosing. Josiah sat with his legs crossed and a cup of the house's coffee at his elbow, a cup that some maid would carry away and wash before the morning was out. And there was no chair anywhere near the place where Hester was plainly expected to stand. That was the whole trial laid out in furniture before a single word had been spoken. The accused would stand, the accuser would sit, and the accuser would not even trouble himself to pour his own coffee. "Your Grace," Josiah said, comfortable as a man in his own parlor, "I will spare you the mystery of it. Kennel-bred children learn their tricks the way other children learn their prayers. A scrap of meat sewn into a hem, a scent rubbed onto the wrist before dawn. Whatever she did out in that yard just now can be bought at any country fair in England for the price of a ribbon." Adrian turned from the window. Up close, he was a good deal younger than his reputation had made him, with eyes that were tired in a way that had nothing at all to do with sleep. He looked at Hester for a long moment before he spoke. "Do you wish to speak?" he asked her. "Yes, Your Grace." "Then speak." Hester kept her hands folded on her apron and kept her voice level, though her heart was beating hard enough to shake the breath in her chest. She let him hear that it shook. The truth deserved to be paid for out loud, and she meant to pay for it. "You know my surname now," she said. "Elias Rushton was my father. He was huntsman here before Mr. Thorne was." She let that sit a moment. Then she gave the Duke the thing she had carried for 8 years. "The night the old stable burned," she said, "my father carried you out through the burning doorway. I saw him. I saw him reach the clean air and put you into Mr. Thorne's arms before he fell. No one else had come round the wall by then. By the time the others did come, Mr. Thorne was walking toward the house with you in his arms, and my father was hidden by the smoke. He let them all believe that he had brought you out. And then he took my father's place." The room had gone very still. Josiah's cup came down against its saucer with a small, hard click. "I was 12, Hester went on. "My mother was already dead, taken by the cholera 2 years before. Mr. Thorne told the steward there was no place for a girl at the kennels, and at his urging, the parish overseers put me into service with a family 2 counties off before the funeral bells had even stopped ringing. I'm not here to prove any of that to you. I could not prove it if I tried. I came back because I needed honest work, and because this was the only place on earth that ever felt to me like home." There was one reason she did not give him, and she kept it behind her teeth. Some part of her had come back to learn whether the young hound from that night still lived, whether one single creature left on this land still remembered the Rushtons at all. Josiah laughed, a short performance for an audience of one. "There it is, Your Grace," he said. "A child's smoke dream nursed for 8 long years, and now served up to you warm." She was 12 years old, half blind with soot, frightened out of her wits, and she saw what a grieving daughter would always wish to see. He set his cup down and let his voice go soft and reasonable, which was the voice Hester had already learned to trust the least. "And I will say the thing that modesty ought to forbid me. You are alive, Your Grace, because of what was done at that doorway. A man does not forget the life he owes." There it was, the debt laid down between the two men like a rope drawn tight and knotted, an invisible thing that bound them together and would strangle whichever of them pulled first. Hester watched Adrian flinch under the weight of it. She did not argue. She offered no witness and no letter and no token out of a dead man's pocket. She stood with her folded hands and let her account lie there in the open beside Josiah's 2 stories that could not both of them be true. Adrian studied her. "You heard him," he said. "You offer me nothing at all to weigh against him. What is it you ask of me?" "Their lives," Hester said. "The Hounds did nothing this morning but lie down. I ask that not one of them be destroyed." She took a single breath. "And when you know it, my father's name spoken aloud where his name was taken from him. Not to me. Before the household that heard the other story told." "When I know it," Adrian repeated. "Not if." "You were there, Your Grace," she said simply. "I only ask you to keep hold of what you already carry." Josiah's chair scraped hard against the floor. Whatever he had thought this housemaid would want from a duke, it had plainly not been this. A woman asking for money can be paid off and forgotten. A woman asking for a position can be ruined and turned out. A woman who asked only for a dead man's name and the lives of 8 dogs had asked for nothing at all that he could buy back from her. Hester watched the fear cross his face a second time and watched him put it away again. "You may go," Adrian said at last. His voice gave away nothing whatever. In the passage beyond the breakfast room, Hester found a young laundry maid frozen over a line of muddy paw prints on the flagstones, a scrubbing pail at her feet, crying already before anyone had thought to accuse her of anything. The girl was afraid of Josiah. The whole passage smelled of that fear. "That mud is mine," Hester said. "I crossed the yard this morning and brought it in. Give me the pail." She knelt and scrubbed the prints away with her own hands. She did not ask the girl her name because a kindness that stops to take a name is a kindness that means to be repaid one day, and Hester did not want to be repaid. The girl fled lighter than she had been. Hester worked on alone. She did not see the Duke of Rookhaven standing at the turn of the passage. He had followed her out to ask her one more question. Instead, he watched the woman who claimed his own rescue's true name kneel on the stones and scrub a frightened child's blame away for her, and he went off with the question still unasked. The next morning, Josiah Thorne began to spend the credit the house had allowed him for 8 years. By the time the servants sat to their breakfast, he had pressured the steward into taking Hester off the good linen and sending her down to scrub the kennel passage instead. The credit had been 8 years in the building, and the whole county had helped to build it. They called Adrian the Beast of Rookhaven. His hounds were feared. Servants left his gate under orders that carried his name and were not seen in the district again. The man himself never once came out to contradict any of the stories. Josiah supplied the beast. Adrian supplied the silence. Between the two of them, the legend had done very well. There was a further reason the name stuck, and it was a reason the district only whispered. The Rookhaven fortune, in part, had come out of the great compensation the government had paid to the owners of slaves when slavery was abolished across the empire in the years after 1833. The estate held plantation ground in the West Indies through the late Duke Adrian's father, and money had come home to Rookhaven that many a cottage family did not care to name aloud. It was blood money, the district said, when it was sure of not being overheard, and a house built on blood money would breed a beast to guard it. Adrian had heard the whisper often enough to hate it and had never found a way to answer a whisper. At the servants' breakfast table, a footman was retelling the old fire story for the benefit of a new scullery girl, and he put the burned stable on the west side of the yard. Josiah corrected him before the man had even finished the sentence. The east side, he said. Past 2 in the morning, 4 horses led out, not 5. He laid each detail straight with an irritated precision that went far past any use the correction could possibly have. He had kept the exact account of that night in perfect order for 8 years. Nobody at the table stopped to wonder why a man would do that for a night that meant nothing to him. Then he announced his morning's work, and he was smiling as he did it. If the girl claims kennel blood, he said, she can clean kennel filth. Blood ought to be kept near its own. It was meant as a public reduction, and it worked as one. 2 of the younger maids would not meet Hester's eyes as she rose from the table. She took up the brush and the bucket without one word of protest, which spoiled some of his pleasure in it, and she went down to the passage that ran along the pack's fence. The 8 hounds were shut behind the iron. They watched her come. The big scarred one at the front of them stood up at the bars with her ears carried forward. Hester kept her eyes down on the stones and scrubbed. It was the trough that stopped her. The pack's water trough stood just inside the fence, and it was down to a gray inch at the bottom. The handlers moved about in the outer yard, waiting on Josiah's next demonstration for the Duke. Every man of them had walked past that trough all morning long. Full buckets stood by the pump not 10 steps away. The animals had simply been left thirsty. One more piece moved on the board in a quarrel between people who had forgotten they were quarreling over living creatures at all. Hester put down her brush. Whatever else this morning meant to take out of her thirst was not going to be any part of it. She carried water and tipped it through the rails where the trough stood twice, and then a 3rd time, until the surface came up clean and bright. She did not speak to the hounds while she did it. She did not go looking for the scarred one's eyes. She poured the water, stepped back from the fence, and knelt again over her stones. Josiah's boots arrived within the minute. He had been watching for something then all along. Good, he said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, and for the Duke, who had come down with 2 gentlemen visitors at his side. She is near them now, Josiah said. Now, girl, make them do it again. Hester sat back on her heels and looked up at him. Do it again, Mr. Thorne. The pretty trick from yesterday. His smile had teeth set into it, down on their bellies in a ring. His Grace's guests would pay good money to see it. Call them. No, Hester said. The whole yard heard the word. Josiah's smile stayed exactly where it was, but his voice dropped low. You refuse your master's order. You are not my master. His Grace is my master, and I cannot give you a thing that was never mine to give. She got to her feet so that she said the rest of it standing plainly and without any heat in it, which only made it carry further along the fence. Whatever happened here yesterday belonged to them, she said. They did nothing for me to sell to you. And she took up her brush again and went back to her scrubbing. She did not stand waiting by the fence. She did not glance back at the pack. She put her hands into the gray water and worked, and her pulse was loud in her own ears because refusing Josiah Thorne in front of 40 people was a frightening thing to have done, and she had gone and done it anyway. Behind her, the old hound moved. Only after Hester had drawn back, only when the whole of the choice was the animal's own and no one else's, the big scarred bitch came to the trough and drank long and deep. Then she did a thing that no one watching could account for. She turned along the fence to the place that was nearest the kneeling maid, pressed her shoulder against the bars and held it there. The pale arrowhead scar lay flat against the iron, close enough that Hester could have reached through the rails and touched it. She did not touch it. She looked at the scar. A grief she did not explain to anyone rose up in her and stayed because she knew the shape of that mark, and she knew where burns like it were got. 8 years fell away in the space of one drawn breath. She said nothing at all. She scrubbed the same stone over and over until her eyes had cleared enough to see it. What do they need? The Duke of Rookhaven had crossed the yard alone and was standing over her, watching the hound lean against the iron for no reason a sane man could put a name to. His guests hung back by the arch. He asked it again. From you. What is it they need from you? Hester looked up at him and refused the question gently because it was the most honest thing she had to give him. I do not know what they want from me, she said. Water is water, your grace. Adrian looked at her a long moment. Then he turned and lifted his voice so that it reached every rail in the yard, and Josiah Thorne most of all. In 4 days, he said, this yard holds the Rookhaven kennel muster. The county may come to it. The pack will be judged by what it freely chooses to do, and here his eyes came to rest on Josiah, so will the fitness of its huntsman be judged. Until that day, no hound on this land is struck or baited or destroyed. They receive their water, and not one of them dies on Mr. Thorne's word. Josiah bowed because 40 people were watching him do it. Above the bow, his eyes found Hester at her bucket, and there was nothing in them she could mistake for anything but hatred. The old hound stayed pressed against the bars until Hester had finished the whole passage, and then she walked the fence line beside her iron, between them the length of it all the way to the gate. On the 3rd day, Josiah Thorne moved his war indoors. He chose the servants' hall at the dinner hour, when the whole of the staff was seated along the 2 long tables and could not politely get up and leave. He came in with 2 of his kennelmen at his back, and he did not shout. He spoke like a man performing a sad and necessary duty, which was a good deal worse than shouting. Before you all then, he said, since it concerns the safety of you all. He let the room fall quiet for him. I have given thought to how 8 trained hounds came to grovel at a stranger's feet, and there is only one answer that is not a fairy story out of a chapbook. Meat, hidden meat, and a kennel child's box of tricks. His head turned slow and deliberate until every eye in the hall had followed his own to Hester where she sat. Kennel leavings in a white cap, he said, are kennel leavings still. Some of the staff laughed, because it is a dangerous thing not to laugh at a powerful man's joke. The laugh was thin, and it went out fast. Hester set down her spoon. The trap had been arranged like a formal dinner party. Everyone placed where they could watch. Nobody placed where they could help. The youngest maids seated exactly where they would learn best what happens to a girl who lets herself be noticed. Stand up, girl, Josiah said. Empty it. He meant her apron. He meant the pockets of it. He meant for the whole assembled staff of Rookhaven Hall to watch her turn out her own linings like a caught thief and shake them over the boards for all to see. Hester stood. She did not hide her hands. She let them hang loose and open at her sides where anyone could see they held nothing. Then she stood there without moving at all. Her voice when it came was even, and it was clear. No, Mr. Thorne. No, he said. He came round the end of the table toward her. There is meat in that apron, and this house will see it brought out. There is a needle case, a bootlace, and half a heel of bread in this apron, Hester said. The fear was in her mouth like the taste of a coin, and she went on past it anyway. But I will not act out my own innocence for you. You may accuse me with your mouth, Mr. Thorne. You may not search me with your hands. He reached for her apron pocket in spite of it. He did not touch it. A hand closed round his wrist and held it exactly where it was. The whole hall came up onto its feet in one long scrape of benches because the Duke of Rookhaven was standing in the doorway of his own servants' hall, and not a soul had seen him come in. Take your hand off her. Adrian's voice was low. The room went cold all round it. Hester understood in that one moment precisely why frightened people called this man the Beast. He had stopped hiding that he was dangerous. Anger stood plain and open in his face for every servant present to see. He let go of Josiah's wrist. You are huntsman to my hounds, Adrian said. That office does not reach into my house. No woman under this roof is handled so that a man may keep hold of his pride. Not by you. Not by anyone at all. The hall waited for Hester to drop a curtsy and be grateful for it. She did curtsy. Then she lifted her head and quietly refused the size of the gift. Not only for me, Your Grace, she said. Make it the rule for every maid who cannot make you hear her. The ones your hounds have never once bowed down to. Otherwise, I am only a favorite. And a favorite is safe just as long as she is loved, and no longer than that. The silence that came after that was a silence of a different kind entirely. The servants looked at one another down the length of the tables. Mrs. Pruitt at the head of the room put one hand flat on the boards, as though to steady the whole table, and her eyes were bright. Adrian looked at Hester a long moment. "It is the rule," he said to the hall, and to her both. "It always should have been." Josiah walked out. He had come there to strip her bare in front of the household. He left it having lost, before that same household, a piece of reach he had exercised for years, as though it had been lawful, and both of them knew the account between them was still wide open. Afterward in the passage, Adrian overtook her. A stem of straw from the morning's work was caught above her ear under the edge of the white cap. He saw it and he stopped. "May I?" he asked, and he waited. Hester considered him, and then bent her head a little toward him. "You may." He drew the straw free with 2 fingers, careful as a man handling a length of thread, and he stepped back again at once. "Why did you come back, Miss Rushton?" he asked. "Truly, a woman with your history could have gone anywhere else on the whole earth." "For honest work," she said. "Near the only place I ever called home. I did not come to dig up proof, your grace. I did not come to force anybody's memory open. I came because when I try to remember being happy, it is this ground I remember standing on." He stood there with the straw still held in his hand. He wanted, with a want that took him quite by surprise, to ask her to stay for a reason that had nothing to do with work or hounds or the dead. He had not earned the asking of it, and he knew that he had not. So he inclined his head and let her go on down the passage, and he kept the straw. The linen warming room on the 4th day smelled of hot cotton and of lavender. It was the first hour of peace Hester had known since she came to Rookhaven. She and Mrs. Pruitt folded the warmed sheets between them in the old easy rhythm of 2 women who have found they work well together. Mrs. Pruitt talked comfortably about nothing much at all, and did not once ask her about fires or about hounds, which was its own kind of gift. Pressed only for some small fault to laugh over, Hester owned up to a scorched pillow slip in her first place of service, hidden away in a rag bag, while she prayed nightly that nobody would think to count the linen. "I dream about it yet," she said. Mrs. Pruitt laughed until she had to set her own corner of the sheet down. The piece ended on a rattle of china out in the passage. A young footman was coming through with a loaded tea tray, the silver pot steaming on it, his right hand wrapped in a bandage clear up to the wrist. Somebody upstairs had wanted the tray. Somebody downstairs had decided that a burned hand was no excuse to be spared the carrying of it. Hester saw the whole cruelty of the errand in a single glance. The tray began to tip. She was there before it went. She took the heavy end of it, the pot end, her hands, closing sure and firm over the rail of the tray. The boy made a sound of pure panic and swayed white in the face, his breath coming in gulps that fed upon themselves and grew. He was going to faint headlong into a tray of scalding silver. Hester turned her own body so that his forehead came against her shoulder instead of against the pot, took the whole weight of the tray herself, and said, without stopping to think about it, in the voice that had been said over her 100 times before she was ever grown, "Slow now. Breathe to my count." The words were out of her before she knew that they were hers. They were not hers. They were her father's. They were the thing Elias Rushton had said to anyone at all whose fear had turned against them and set them fighting the very breath that would have saved them. The boy obeyed the words the way that people had always obeyed them, one ragged breath drawn in against her shoulder, and then a slower one behind it until his legs came back under him and held. "There," Hester said. "Sit down now. The tray is mine." Mrs. Pruitt was already bringing a stool, already saying that she would carry the tea up herself, and would dearly enjoy hearing anybody try to object to it. None of the 3 of them had heard the Duke of Rookhaven stop on the back stair. Adrian stood with one hand on the rail. The passage had gone strange around him because the words had closed on something lying at the very bottom of his memory. Smoke, rough leather under his own cheek, and the smell of scorched hair. A man's arms bearing up his whole slack weight, and a man's voice, low and sure, saying those exact words over him, the same words the maid had just said, down the passage. And a second voice, Josiah's voice, shouting, but the shouting had been far off, farther off than the arms had been. The certainty of it stood up in him whole and finished. The hand that had carried him did not belong to the voice he had thanked for 8 years. He gripped the stair rail until the wood of it complained aloud. He found her alone in the linen room a quarter of an hour later and did not pretend to any errand. "The words you said to that boy," he said. "Where did you have them?" Hester looked at him and answered plainly. "From my father," she said. "He said them to anyone whose fear was strangling them. Stable lads, a groom pinned once under a cart, me in thunderstorms when I was small." She smoothed the sheet in front of her flat. "I did not choose to say them, Your Grace. They live in my mouth. That is all it is." "I have heard those words in smoke," Adrian said. The linen room was warm, and the silence that stood in it now was not warm at all. Hester held his gaze and asked him for nothing. He watched her not use the door. His own memory had just swung open in front of her, and something in him made its decision. "I doubted him," he said. "I want you to know that much. 8 years, and I never once said it aloud, not to any living soul. The face never matched the voice. And I was carried out of that fire by a pair of arms I could never thank. So I thanked the arms I was given instead, because to doubt the man who saved your life feels like a sin against him." He stopped himself. "Feels safer than the truth," he said. "That is the honest word for it." Holding on to him felt safer than letting go and looking. "You were insensible from the smoke," Hester said gently. "No man wakes out of that owing anybody perfect sight." He looked at her then with an expression she had not seen on him before, unguarded and young under all the tiredness. "May I court you?" he asked, without making a debt of it. "Not the Duke and the huntsman's daughter." Adrian asking Hester, because of what I have seen of her with my own 2 eyes. The want in her rose up so strong and so sudden that it frightened her. She named it to herself honestly, and then she set it down. "Not while their lives are the price of standing near me," she said. 8 creatures are under sentence out in your yard, Your Grace, and the man who wants them dead watches everything I so much as touch. Court me now, and he will spend it against them and against me. Court me now, and you hand him the knife yourself." Then, after the muster, Adrian said. He took 1 step nearer to her. "May I kiss you?" "Not yet," Hester said. The gentleness in it was real. So was the refusal. Adrian accepted the both of them together. He stepped back and he bowed to a housemaid in a linen warming room, as though she were already a duchess, and he went out. On the back stair, he passed no one, but from the yard door below, Josiah Thorne watched the Duke of Rookhaven come down with his composure gone out of him, shaken open like a man walking away from the wreck of a carriage. Josiah understood with a perfect and sudden clarity exactly what was coming back and exactly how little time was left to him now. On the 5th day, Josiah played the card he ought to have led with from the start, the one that needed no hidden meat and no search of an apron. He played a lie wearing the Duke's own name. He came to Mrs. Pruitt's parlor with his hat held respectfully in his hands and grave concern arranged upon his face. "His Grace has thought better of the girl's staying on," he said. "With the county coming to the muster, he wants no scandal walking about his yard. The Rushton daughter, the hounds, the talk, down in the village of it. She is to go before all that quietly for the sake of everyone. His Grace would rather not say it to her face, you understand. He is tender that way." Mrs. Pruitt did not believe 1 word of it. She sent the wicked boy up to the Duke's study with a single question. Had His Grace given this order? She told the boy to run and to run the whole way. Until an answer came back down, she said she would not let Hester Rushton be taken out through any back gate on this estate. Hester understood all of it before Mrs. Pruitt had even finished telling her. She watched the older woman's hands twist against her apron, and she felt the anger come up in her, and then a fierce protectiveness rise up right behind the anger, larger than the anger was. Mrs. Pruitt had taken the handle of her trunk unasked on the very first morning. Hester would not repay a kindness like that by making the woman choose between her employment and her defiance. "I will pack," Hester said. "You will not be any part of the refusing, Mrs. Pruitt. There is nothing here yet to refuse." But Mrs. Pruitt would be part of something. While the boy carried her question up the stairs, she walked out of Rookhaven Hall at Hester's side in her good shawl, in full view of the windows of the great house, carrying one end of the battered trunk between them, and she turned a dismissal into a procession of two. At the boundary of the estate, where the cottage row began, and where the road to the workhouse ran off past it, she set the trunk down on the low stone wall and planted herself beside it. "I will wait here with you for the carrier," she said, in a voice that dared the whole sky to object to it. They did not wait long, and it was not the carrier that came. The Duke of Rookhaven had sat down to his ledgers when the wicket boy reached him with Mrs. Pruitt's question in his mouth. Those who watched him leave the house said afterward that he did not run, and that everything in the manner of his walking made them want him to. He came down the lane on foot and alone, and he stopped a respectful distance off from the two women at the wall. He looked at Hester's trunk sitting out in the road for the second time since her coming to Rookhaven. The anger in his face was plain to see before he mastered it. "I gave no such order," he said. "I would sooner burn my own name than spend it in that way. Miss Rushton, I have not come down here to order you back either. A door that a woman is marched through is no door at all." He paused. "I have come to ask you, if Josiah Thorne holds no authority over any house servant from this hour onward, will you return?" Hester stood at the wall with the wind pulling at the edge of her cap. She did not answer at once. He did not fill her silence up for her. Mrs. Pruitt stood 3 steps off in plain earshot, exactly where she had meant to stand. "Why?" Hester asked. "Say the true reason your grace or I will walk on to the village and be no trouble to anyone." And Adrian, Duke of Rookhaven, said the thing he had no proof for and meant with the whole of his life. "If I never remember one more breath of that night," he said, "the Hounds will still live, and Thorne will not rule this house. By my debt, and I want you here, because I trust the woman I have seen with my own eyes. That is the reason, and it is the whole of it, and it does not wait on my memory to make it true." Mrs. Pruitt heard every word. He had said it so that she would hear it. Hester looked at him for a long moment, and what rose up in her was not the vindication she had never once asked for. It was this instead: a man choosing her before the proof was in, with the secret still sealed shut, on nothing at all but what he had watched her do with her own hands. She let herself know that it was joy, and she let it be joy. "Then here are my conditions," she said. "The pack stays together until the muster, every hound of them, all 8. Mr. Thorne punishes no servant and no animal before it. And if the day ever comes that you believe my father saved you, the naming of him is done in public before the whole household, not whispered to me on a stair in the dark." "Agreed," Adrian said. "All 3 of them." "Then I return because I choose to," Hester said. "Because the Hounds stay together, and because no one pays for your doubt before the yard hears the truth of it." He offered her his hand for the walk back, palm turned up, asking and not commanding. "Will you take my hand?" he said. Hester looked at the offered hand. A duke's hand held out on a public lane to a dismissed housemaid in full view of the cottage row and every window in it. She took it freely. Mrs. Pruitt picked up her own end of the trunk with the deep satisfaction of a woman watching a long account come right at last. At the servants' entrance, with Josiah Thorne standing gray in the face among the staff who had gathered to see it, Adrian spoke clearly and to every one of them. "Miss Rushton returns at my request, and upon her own conditions," he said. "Any order at all concerning her that does not come out of my own mouth is no order of mine, and will be treated as none." He did not once look at Josiah as he said it. He did not need to look at him, and he was not finished. Within the hour in the kennel yard, and before the whole assembled body of the handlers, Adrian required of Josiah the surrender of the kennel keys and the kennel horn. The daily rule of the pack went into other hands along with them. Ned Fairclough, the underkeeper, would hold the yard until the day of the muster. One single thing was left to Josiah: a single public call at the muster itself, so that the pack could answer him or refuse to answer him before the whole of the county come to watch. Josiah gave up the keys with a bow. He kept his eyes down on the gravel while he did it. On the last night before the muster, Josiah chained the pack. He had given up the keys before witnesses. That was true. Nobody had thought to ask him for the duplicate a key cut years before and kept close about him ever since. Past midnight, he let himself in through the wicket alone. He staked out 8 short chains, no 2 hounds, set within reach of each other, so that the animals who slept every night of their lives in one warm heap were parted now and pinned to the cold side of the yard. A restless pack shows badly. A pack that shows badly can be called dangerous in front of a whole county. The rule of the yard had been taken away from him. The arithmetic of it was still his own. The hounds did not howl. They did a thing that was harder to stand and hear than howling. A low, unsettled shifting chain against chain, and now and then, one thin high, whine the sound of creatures whose whole order in the world has been pulled out from under them. Hester heard it from the servants' stair and came down into the dark. She did not go into them. Every part of her body wanted to go into them. She did not open the gate. She did not walk the chain line. She did not speak one single word of comfort out into the dark, because a word from her was worth 8 lives now, and anything at all that looked like influence would be tomorrow's evidence against them. She took her shawl, and she sat herself down on the ground outside the iron fence, in plain view of anyone at the place where the old hound's stake stood nearest to the rail. And she did nothing whatever except be there. The old hound was lying with her chain pooled beside her. She raised her head and looked at the seated woman for a long time. Then she got up and walked to the very end of what the chain allowed her, which brought her hard against the bars, and she lay down again there with her scarred shoulder pressed to the cold iron as close to Hester as the whole world would let her come. Only then, only after the animal had chosen it entirely for herself, Hester laid her own palm flat against her side of the iron, opposite the pale arrowhead, with the width of a single bar standing between her skin and the scar. The old hound let out a great sigh from the very bottom of her chest and settled. Down the chain line, one by one, the shifting went quiet, 7 young hounds taking their answer from the old one, the way they took everything from her. Boots came on the gravel. Hester did not startle. She knew the walk of him by now. Adrian stopped at the fence and looked down the chain line a long moment. His keys were given up before witnesses, he said. No order of mine put iron on them tonight. I know it, Hester said. I heard one man come and go near midnight. The chains are his, and they had to have been found so. They are found so, he said. He crossed the yard and knocked at the keeper's cottage himself. Ned came out with his boots still unlaced. He saw the chain line and asked nothing at all. Stake by stake, he loosed the pack. The hounds poured back into their one warm heap, the young ones climbing over the old until that corner of the dark breathed evenly again. The old bitch left the heap to the young ones. She came back along the fence to the place nearest to Hester and lay down against the iron. Josiah came out of the dark on the far side of the fence, while Ned was still coiling chain. The chains were good order, he said. You will thank me for them when they run clean tomorrow. You gave up your keys before witnesses, Adrian said. You kept one back without them. This yard is barred to you until morning. Your one call at the muster stands, nothing beyond it. Josiah looked through the bars at the old hound lying against the iron, and then he looked at the maid. Enjoy the ground while it is soft to you, he said. He said it to the hound. He meant it for the both of them. Then he walked back off into the dark. May I sit with you, Adrian asked, and he waited there in the dark for her answer, and he did not sit until she had given it. He settled beside her on the cold ground in his good coat, a duke down in the dirt outside his own kennels. For a while neither one of them said anything at all. Her name is Dido Hester, said at last. My father raised her from a pup right beside me. We were young together, she and I. She slept across my feet in the kennel loft while he did his rounds at night. She kept her eyes on the scarred shoulder against the bars. That mark is from the stable doorway, she said. The night he fell, she was outside it crying, a young hound crying like a person cries, and the fire in the doorway caught her across the shoulder. "She carries the same knight I do, your grace. She has carried it here all this time, and nobody knew what they were looking at when they looked at her." Adrian was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had the care in it of a man setting down something that would break. "I remember her," he said. "I did not know it until just now. A young hound crying close by me in the smoke, and Thorne's voice a long way off out in the yard, and the shoulder under my face, leather and dog on it, and pipe smoke. A kennel man's leather." His hands closed on his own knees. "Miss Rushton," he said, "I believe your father carried me." The words went through Hester like heat poured into a cold cup. 8 years, and here it was at the last. She found that she could not speak to answer it. "I will not say it here," Adrian went on. "You required a public restoration of him, and you were right to require it. A truth of this kind, whispered at a fence in the dark, would only be one more thing stolen away from him. Tomorrow the county comes. I will say what I believe, where it costs me something to say it." "Then do not give his name back to him in a whisper," Hester said. "Tomorrow, aloud." "Aloud," he said. He turned his head. Even in the dark she could feel the way that he looked at her. "There is more I want to say aloud," he said. "I want a life with you in it. I have stopped pretending otherwise, even to myself. May I ask you something larger than courtship when all this is over?" Joy and fear came up in her together, joined like two hands clasped. Hester gave him her answer. "If you stand where everyone can hear you, ask it," she said. "Then I will stand where everyone can hear me," he said. He rose and bowed to her in the dark, as though the mud beneath them were the floor of a ballroom, and he went to rouse the house for the morning. Hester stayed a while longer with her palm against the iron. She sat with the old hound through one more turn of the cold, so that no creature at that fence would wait for the morning alone. The morning of the Rookhaven kennel muster came up clear and cold. By 9 of the clock the gravel yard was ringed with more people than it had held in the whole of Hester's lifetime. The household stood along the near fence kitchen, and stable and house servants, together in their Sunday best. Beyond the outer rail the village edge had come out. Cottagers, the carrier, the blacksmith with his sleeves rolled down for once in the year. Gentry carriages stood waiting in the lane, and at the very front of all of it, where the housekeeper of Rookhaven Hall had every right to stand and no custom that permitted it, Mrs. Pruitt had planted herself hard against the rail itself, refusing the servant's place at the rear without saying one single word about the doing of it. The black iron kennel gate stood shut at the far end. The exercise yard lay raked and empty in front of it. Anybody who had heard the story of the new maid's first morning, which by now was every soul present, could see plainly that the stage was the very same stage. It wanted only the players brought out onto it. Adrian came out to the middle rail, and he did not make a speech. "The conditions of this muster," he said, in a voice that carried clean to the lane. "No hound is struck or baited or punished for anything that happens in this yard today. The pack is judged by what it does freely, and this county will judge by that same light the fitness of the man who has called himself its master. Mr. Thorne gave up the keys of this yard yesterday. He keeps one thing today, a single call, so that the pack may answer him before you all or refuse him before you all. Miss Rushton, since the conduct of the pack began with you, you will stand in the yard, if you consent to it." "I consent," Hester said, and she walked out onto the open gravel alone in her plain dress and her white cap to the place where a trunk had once sat in the mud. Her hands were cold. Her mouth was dry as ash. She had slept perhaps an hour of the night, and she would not have traded her place in that yard with any living soul at the rail. Josiah Thorne entered the yard like a man who had rehearsed the entering of it. He bowed to the carriages. He had dressed himself for the office he no longer held. Ned carried the kennel horn out to him and gave it over without a word, for one call, before witnesses, was the whole of what remained to him now. "Your Grace," Josiah said. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rolled out over them, "you have heard a pretty tale of hounds bowing to a maid. You will now see. The plain truth of it stood up in front of you. A pack knows its own blood and its own bread, and this pack knows one voice on the earth. They know one master. Watch them. He raised the horn, faced the black gate, and gave the kennel out. The horn first, and then his own command behind it. The great two-note call that every handler on that ground had heard him use 1,000 mornings running. The inner wicket of the gate was opened. 8 hounds came out into the pen behind the bars and stood and looked at him. "To me," Josiah called and slapped his boot. 8 heads turned away from him. It was not fright, and it was not confusion. It was as deliberate as a jury filing back into a room. 8 hounds turned their heads away from the huntsman in front of the whole county. A sound went along the rails, half a gasp and half a laugh, the most dangerous sound that an audience can make at a proud man. Josiah's neck went red above his collar. He called again, harder, the command cracking out like a whip laid across the air. And Dido, old lead of the Rookhaven pack, walked to the far fence, lay down with her back turned square to him, facing the opposite rail, and rested her chin flat upon the ground. One after another, 7 hounds lay down behind her, their backs to the huntsman. It was not a ring this time. It was a wall. The plainest refusal ever delivered without one sound to carry it. The yard paid for it in small true coins. A handler let his spare lead slide right out of his hand and did not stoop to take it up. Mrs. Pruitt's knuckles went white where they gripped the rail. A kitchen boy started a cheer and strangled it half-born in his throat because nobody yet knew whether it was safe to cheer. "They have answered you," Adrian said. The words fell into the silence, and they stayed there. For a moment, Josiah stood entirely alone in the middle of his rehearsed morning in front of the carriages where every person attending could watch him choose what he would do. There was a door out of that yard, and it was called the Truth, and he saw it, and the man was not capable of walking through it. He straightened himself. "Then they are dangerous," he said. His voice found its footing again as he said it, the old authority pouring back into him like water running into a hole in the ground. "Your Grace, I have served this house too long to flatter it now. A pack that abandons command is a broken pack. Broken packs maul. You have all of you," and here he swung about to take in the whole rail, "you have all been standing within reach of animals that no man alive can govern. That is no marvel that you have seen. That is a slaughter waiting only for its day, and I will show it to you now." He rounded on the handlers. "Open the gate," he said. "Drive them through. All 8 of them at the run." "Nobody mud." Ned Fairclough looked at the maid standing far out on the open gravel directly in the path of anything that came through that gate, and he put his hands behind his back like a schoolboy called to answer and refusing to. All along the fence, the other handlers did the very same. That quiet mutiny was its own verdict passed on 8 years of Josiah Thorne's rule of the yard. "Then I will drive them myself," Josiah said. He strode to the black gate and tore the latch up with his own hand. Adrian was already moving, cutting across the open gravel toward Hester, and Hester stopped him with her voice alone, sharp and clear across the whole of the yard. "Stay outside, Your Grace. Let the answer be theirs." He stopped at the boundary line as though the words had been a wall built across it. She saw what it cost him to stop. She saw him pay it out. Hester walked to the exact center of the gravel, where all of them could see her plainly, and she turned to face the opening gate, and she opened her empty hands at her sides. The gate swung wide. 8 huge hounds came through at its speed, a dark river of muscle and breath pouring straight toward the small woman standing motionless in the middle of the yard, and every voice at the rails stopped at once and together. They came on like weather gravel flying up behind them, the ground itself drumming under the weight of them, and Hester rushed and stood in the middle of it with her hands open and did not move and did not make one sound. She was afraid. She stood inside the fear the way she had stood inside it on her first morning, and she gave the animals the only thing she had ever had to give them, which was her whole self undefended. Dido slowed first. The old lead came out of the run 3 lengths from Hester, dropping from that terrible speed down into an unhurried walk. The 7 behind her broke around the woman, like water breaking round a stone, set in a river slowed and circled. Dido walked the last 3 steps of it. She pressed her scarred shoulder against the maid's skirt and leaned there for a breath, an old friend arriving home at last. And then she lowered her head to the gravel and folded herself down at Hester's feet. And then, in the full sight of the county, the pack made its ring, one hound at a time. The great brindled male lowered himself next against Dido's flank, his head down on his paws. A long moment, and then the gray bitch beside him angled toward Hester. Then, the young one who had shouldered the wicket open on the first morning, awkward and sincere, dropping his head like a boy copying his elders in church. A fourth came down, and a fifth shoulder to shoulder, each settled into its own place, each one of them choosing it, until the sixth and the seventh sank down together, and an uneven circle closed round the woman in the white cap, and the yard had gone so silent that every person standing in it could hear the animals breathing. A handler's chain slipped and struck the fence. The sound rang out like a bell, and nobody so much as turned a head to it. Mrs. Pruitt's hand came off the rail and rose to cover her mouth. Somewhere among the servants a woman began to cry, and then another woman began, before one single word had been spoken. Through the crowd low went the one word that explained the whole of it. Rushton. Rushton. The huntsman's daughter. The huntsman stood alone on the gravel with the horn dead in his hand and watched everything he had built lie down in the dirt before somebody else. He had told them that she baited the pack, and the whole staff had watched that lie fall flat on its face in the servants' hall. Now the county itself watched her stand there with no crumb and no cue and no motion of her hand at all, while 8 hounds chose the ground at her feet. He had told them the pack was dangerous, and the pack lay breathing gently in a ring around a housemaid, peaceable as sleep itself. Only one exit was left in the whole world to him, to make the miracle small. Kennel blood dogs and their old lines, an accident of scent and of habit, and nothing more. And to make it into nothing, he had to reach for the only other time it had ever happened. They watched him open his mouth to save himself. They bowed to him that night, too. The words came out of him before he understood the price of them. Hester turned her head. "What night?" she said. Josiah's eyes went once quickly to the scar on Dido's shoulder. "The fire," he said. "Where was my father standing?" Hester asked. Silence gathered at every rail in the yard. "At the stable door," Josiah said. "And who was in his arms?" Josiah looked at the daughter of Elias Rushton, and he found that there was no harmless answer left anywhere for him to give. "His Grace," he said. Mrs. Pruitt's voice came from the front rail, shaking and plain. "I have kept this house since the months after that fire," she said. 8 years, Mr. Thorne. These hounds and the hounds before them, sire and dam of them. And not one time in 8 years did a single one of them ever bow down to you." And then Adrian, Duke of Rookhaven, stepped up to the rail's gate and said what he remembered aloud before every one of them. "I was carried out of that fire on a kennelman's shoulder," he said. Leather worn soft with dog and with pipe smoke. There was a young hound at the doorway, crying a hound with a burned shoulder. The man who carried me said, "Slow, now breathe to my count." The maid of this house said those very same words to a hurt boy in this house, not 4 days ago. They were her father's words. He looked at Josiah. His voice did not rise, which made the whole of it worse to hear. "And your voice, Thorne," he said. "The voice I have thanked for 8 years of my life. Your voice was shouting out in the yard, far off, outside the door. I will swear to it on anything you please to name." Hester asked the last question of him from inside her father's ring. "Who carried his Grace through that door?" she said. Josiah had already put Elias at the doorway with the Duke in his arms, out of his own mouth. The last lie left to him would have to deny his own words and a living man's memory both at once in front of the county. There was wreckage in his face, but no one who watched him ever afterward claimed to have seen him look away. "Your father did," he said. The yard made a sound like a wave coming down onto shingle. Some cheered and some wept, and Mrs. Pruitt did the both at once, laughing through her tears with her fists pressed against the rail. Adrian did not let it run on long. Mr. Thorne, he said, you will be off Rookhaven land by sunset. You will not enter the kennels again, nor stand within sight of them, nor speak for this house anywhere on the earth. What wages are owed to you will follow you, nothing else of ours ever will. That would have been the end of an ordinary reckoning. It was not the end of this one. For the story of that night had one more chamber in it, and Adrian opened it himself in front of them all because he had decided in the dark of the night before that he would rather carry the whole truth in the open than hide even a piece of it in his own good name. You have all called me the Beast of Rookhaven, he said, and you have all heard why this house is spoken of the way it is. So hear the rest of it plainly, since we are speaking plainly this morning. On the night of that fire there were papers in the storeroom beside the stable, the estate's West Indian ledgers, the registers of the people my father held as property on plantation ground across the sea that were being gathered up and put in order so that a claim might be made for compensation, the money the government paid out to the owners of slaves when slavery was ended across the empire. That is why a man was awake in that yard past 2 in the morning. Those papers were given into Mr. Thorne's keeping that night. He let the lamp go, or he slept, or he drank, and the fire started where he had been set to watch. When it caught, he ran. Elias Rushton ran the other way into it and carried me out and died of it. Thorne did not only steal a brave man's name to climb by, he stole it to bury his own neglect, the neglect that killed the man. I have lived 8 years on a fortune I did not choose, and a rescue I misremembered, and I made the theft of it useful by believing it and never once asking a question. I ask the questions now, out loud, where you can all hear the asking. The yard was silent in a new way. It was the silence of a district hearing a great house tell the truth about itself for the first time in living memory, and not knowing yet what to do with the sound of it. Adrian turned back to the huntsman. The discharge follows you in writing, he said, over the Rookhaven seal. The false order given in my name. The chains put on the pack. And the theft of Elias Rushton's deed and his good name. Set down so that no kennel anywhere that receives a Rookhaven reference can mistake what it is you have done. The county magistrate has already asked to examine that false order. You had better be gone before he arrives. Josiah Thorne walked out through the gate. He had ruled for 8 years, and the crowd drew back from him on both sides as he went and did not touch him and did not speak to him, which was the loudest thing of all. Then Hester spoke from within the ring, and the county stood and listened to a housemaid state her terms. Hear what I ask, she said, before anything else is said this morning. The 8 hounds of Rookhaven stay together, and they live. No keeper in this yard ever again earns their obedience through pain. My father's name is spoken whenever this house tells the story of that fire from this day on. And I am not payment. Whatever I am to any man here, I am not a debt discharged. Granted, Adrian said. All of it, before all of them. Then he turned to this crowded rails and set the record straight in plain loud words that the whole district could carry home with it. Elias Rushton carried me out of the fire, he said. Josiah Thorne stole Elias Rushton's deed. I made the theft useful by believing it without a question. I gave Thorne his place and let him rule under my gratitude, and I failed for 8 years to so much as ask where Elias Rushton's daughter had been sent. I restore the name today. I cannot restore the 8 years. The cheer that went up frightened the rooks off the roof of Rookhaven Hall in a black cloud. When it thinned, Adrian spoke again, and now he spoke to Hester, though every rail could hear him do it. One thing more, and it stands whatever else this morning brings, he said. Elias Rushton's death benefit, and his wages are restored to his daughter in full. The old kennel cottage is vested in her for the whole of her life, whether she stays or leaves or marries or refuses every soul upon this ground. Your home and what this estate owed to your father are yours before I ask you for anything at all. Your answer to me changes neither one of them. The steward came forward with the paper already drawn up so that the county could see with its own eyes that the thing was real, and not a passing mood of the morning. And there was one thing further still, a small thing beside a fortune, and yet the thing that broke Hester's composure, where nothing else had managed it. Adrian had ordered before the sun was up that Elias Rushton be taken out of the pauper's ground, where Josiah's lie had buried him, nameless, the ground kept for those who died without means and without character, and be given a marked grave with his name cut into the stone and the word huntsman under it, and under that, the year. The new poor law and a liar's slander had between them stripped a hero of his own name in death. It was going back onto the stone by nightfall. Only then did Adrian come to the edge of the ring and stop, because it was hers and it was theirs, and he would not cross into it uninvited. "May I come to you?" he asked. "You may," Hester said. Dido rose, unhurried, and stepped aside, opening a gap in the ring like a door swung back, and the Duke of Rookhaven walked through it and knelt down on the gravel before his own household and took her hand in both of his. "Hester Rushton," he said, "will you permit me to court you openly with no debt standing between us?" "Yes," she said, "because you chose mercy before memory." He rose without letting go of her hand. The yard came apart with joy. The handlers pulled the caps off their heads and beat them against the rail. The kitchen boy got his cheer out at the last. Mrs. Pruitt abandoned the rail altogether and was first into the yard, and all around the couple the 8 hounds of Rookhaven rose up onto their feet, alive and unafraid, tails swinging, breaking their ring apart into a warm and shoving crowd of bodies which had been the better shape all along. Through the rest of that autumn and through the first of the winter, Adrian courted Hester where everyone could see it and where nobody was required to. He sat at the kennel fence in the cold. He learned every hound's name and its temper. He came to the servants' supper when he was invited to it, and he left when the work began. He asked her ordinary questions on ordinary days when no life and no name and no debt was waiting to be settled by the answer. At the fence, one gray afternoon, he asked her how Mrs. Pruitt had come to be standing out at the boundary wall that day with half a trunk in her hand. "I told Mrs. Pruitt what choice she could afford to make," Hester said, "and that she should make only that one." "And she corrected you," he said. "With the trunk handle," Hester said. He laughed. The sounds of it was still new enough in that yard that 2 of the hounds came trotting over to see about it. On a still afternoon before Christmas, they walked together up to the churchyard, and Dido came with them and would not be left at the lich gate. The new stone stood at the head of a grave that had been nameless a season before, in the poorer corner of the ground where those without means were laid, and where a liar's word had once kept Elias Rushton company in place of his own name. The mason had cut the letters deep and plain: Elias Rushton, huntsman, and under that the year that he had died in it, 1834. Hester had not seen it finished until that day. She knelt in the cold grass and put her bare hand flat against the face of the stone, the way she had once put it against the iron of the fence with a scar on the far side of the bar. And she stayed like that a while and said nothing that anybody needed to hear. Adrian stood back and let her have it. When she rose at last, he said only that the parish register had been corrected as well, so that the false entry no longer stood against the true one, and that any soul who went looking 100 years hence would find the man set down for what he was, and not for what he had been called. Dido had lain down across the foot of the grave with her scarred shoulder to the wind, exactly as though she had done it before, and meant to go on doing it, and neither of them tried to move her. She came away only when Hester came away and walked between them down the whole length of the lane with her gray head level and easy, an old creature who had carried one night for 8 years and had finally been allowed to set some part of it down. There was a further thing that Adrian had done without saying it, and Hester learned of it from Mrs. Pruitt and not from him. He had written to the parish 2 counties off, where a frightened girl of 12 had once been placed in service before the funeral bells had stopped, and had settled upon that household a sum that made plain, without a word of accusation in it, that the Duke of Rookhaven now knew whose daughter they had taken in and how she had come to them. He asked nothing of them by it. He only wished he told Mrs. Pruitt when she pressed him that the account of it should exist somewhere in writing besides his own memory, because he had learned what came of a truth that lived in one man's memory and nowhere else on the earth. The county changed its talk about the house that winter, slowly the way frozen ground gives up its cold. The name of the beast of Rookhaven was still heard in the tap rooms for a while, out of long habit, but it began to sit oddly on the tongue of whoever used it, because the man they meant by it had knelt in his own gravel before his servants had told the district the worst about his own fortune without being made to, and had put a dead huntsman's name back onto a stone with his own money and his own hand. A house does not lose a legend of 8 years in a single morning. But the stories that came out of Rookhaven after the muster were of a different kind, and the cottage women no longer crossed to the far side of the road when they heard the hounds, because the hounds, everyone now agreed, had turned out to be the best judges of character in the whole parish. He asked her at the open kennel gate on the first soft morning of the new year, with Dido lying in the thin winter sun between the two of them. He stayed on his feet this time. He had knelt where the kneeling counted. "There is no debt between us," he said, "and nothing left over to settle. Marry me, Hester." "Adrian," she said. It was the first time in her life she had spoken his given name, and he stood a moment learning what his own name weighed when it was hers to give. "Yes," she said. "Now?" he asked. "Now," she said. He kissed her at the open gate, and Dido's tail beat the gravel twice, which settled the matter for the whole of the establishment. The banns were read out through the last of the winter. On the morning of the wedding breakfast, under the first true sun of the spring, the black-iron kennel gate of Rookhaven Hall stood wide open, and nobody was worried about it at all. The breakfast had begun up in the great hall and had refused to stay there. It spilled out through the doors and down the steps and into the gravel yard itself, tables and cloths and cider and cake, until the place where a whole county had once held its breath was full instead of chairs and of laughter. Mrs. Pruitt had done the arranging of it, and she had done it in her new mistress's own language. Chairs set along the yard wall, for everybody the very same chairs, the handler beside the footman, beside the laundry maid, nobody standing while another sat, nobody watching another eat. When the vicar's wife raised an eyebrow at the seating of it, Mrs. Pruitt smiled like sunrise coming up and said that the seating was by the order of Her Grace. Her Grace. Hester Rushton had been Duchess of Rookhaven for 4 hours, and the household said the 2 words at every chance it could invent, bringing her things she had never asked for, only so that they might say the words over again. She wore no jewels at the breakfast. She had asked for none. She sat where she could see the open gate, her husband beside her, and under the table his hand found hers and asked her a question with a light pressure, and she answered it the same way. Yes. Still yes. The 8 hounds of Rookhaven were everywhere at once. It was a scandal, and everyone loved it. They moved through the breakfast like large and confident opinions. The household fed them shamelessly under the tables. The young one leaned his whole weight against the blacksmith until the man gave up his chair to him. And Dido, senior hound of the establishment, gray about the muzzle and entirely without repentance, worked the tables like a pickpocket at a country fair. She had already nosed a plum tart off an unattended bench and eaten it with the calm of a churchwarden. Now, as the couple watched her, she extracted the trailing ribbon from a bridesmaid's posy with a surgeon's delicacy and trotted off with it, streaming from her mouth, wearing it the rest of the morning like a decoration she had awarded to herself. "Your hound, Your Grace," Adrian said gravely, "is a thief." "She is not my hound," Hester said, watching the ribbon go by with love all over her face. "She is her own, and she always was. They walk with me because they choose to walk with me. The day I command them is the day I have forgotten every single thing this yard taught this house." The hounds went where they liked. What they liked, as it happened, was to be wherever she was. Ned Fairclough, keeper of the yard in his own right now, came up shy with his cider and said the thing he had carried since the first morning. "It was my hand that slipped the wicket, Your Grace," he said, "that first morning." "Then you opened the gate first," Hester said. Ned walked back to his fellows a good deal taller than he had come. Near the cake, a cluster of the youngest servants had gathered round the Duke, the laundry maid of the paw prints among them, unafraid now of anybody. He had come to stand among them with cider in his hand, easy in a way that not one of them could have imagined of him half a year before. The smallest of them, a scullery girl still in some awe of her own new shoes, asked him whether it was true the story about the fire. The older servants held their breath at the asking of it. Adrian crouched down to her height and told it to her true and plain words without being pressed the way he had promised the record would stand forever. "There was a fire here once," he said, "long before you came to this house. I was caught inside the stable, and the smoke had me, and a man walked straight into that fire and carried me out over his shoulder. His name was Elias Rushton. He was huntsman to this house and the bravest man who ever served it, and this morning I married his daughter." He smiled, then wide and unguarded a smile the county was still getting used to seeing on him. "Elias Rushton saved my life," he said. "His daughter taught me what to do with it." The scullery girl looked over at the Duchess. The Duchess, who had heard every word of it, could not answer the child's smile for a moment because her eyes had filled. She let them fill. It was joy, and anyone who cared to look could see plainly that it was joy. When the fiddler struck up and the yard began to clear itself for dancing, Adrian came back to his wife and stood in front of her, there in front of the whole warm wreck of the breakfast. He offered her his hand as though it were the very first time and asked her, "May I?" Hester looked up at her husband. Behind him, the gate stood open. The hounds were drifting toward the sound of the music. Mrs. Pruitt was ordering the cake defended. Every bowl in the kennel was full. Every chair along the wall was equal to every other. And the story of the fire belonged at the last to the man who had died a hero inside it. "Always ask," she said, and she took his hand. They walked toward the open house through the music, and the 8 hounds of Rookhaven went with them in the loose and joyful crowd, no ring and no ceremony to it. Just family, moving all together through a gate that no one at Rookhaven ever again locked in fear.